Hi, everybody. I'm Ashraf Ghoniem. I'm the effects department supervisor over at Blizzard Animation, which is a subset of SFD, which is a group within Blizzard that supports all the game teams for the story, narrative, content like this. So we do all the cinematics, which would be, right now, which would be in-game and pre-rendered. So in that, we kind of have to start, we basically, because our team has to touch so many different properties from Overwatch to World of Warcraft to Diablo, that we have to change our style all the time based on the property. So what type of stylization of effects do we do? We do two different types of stylization. One is interpreting the game effects aesthetic into a hyper-real or realistic matter, as you can see here in the background. Another is taking something and bending it into more style of certain animation or some aesthetic that the creative stakeholders come up with. So we kind of have to shift our style quite a bit, which is part of the fun of our job at Blizzard. You can see here this is for a WoW cinematic. This is probably one of our favorite projects that we did because we tried to make something that looked very magical, but also looked physical and looked like it could happen in the real world. So you can see here that part of the lore of this magical effect is that it has these black tendrils that come out of, that is related to the magic, and also so green, and it's all has to be in keeping with what the game visual effects artists have come up with in the lore of the gameplay mechanics. So we try to take that instead of just doing, at first it was supposed to be just a green explosion. And then we had, what's fun about our job is we get to take that and interpret it and try to make it something that's that respects and works with the game. So we came up with this very swirly explosion that is emanating these black ichor that's floating in the air. So this is kind of an example of the type of work we do, but try to ground it in reality and use real physical simulations and the best renders we can use to make it look like something close to a visual effects shot or a animation piece. Another thing that we do, excuse the weird renders. So this is the fun thing about our group is that we actually do vertical and horizontal because of marketing and all that. So you get to see the raw capture here of the vertical and horizontal. But another thing that we do is take an aesthetic that is not defined. So this is for a game called ArcLight Rumble. What everybody wanted was something that looked like it was you're in the game board in kind of a macro photography vibe, but they wanted all the effects to have this stylized look. So we try to find this middle ground. And if you look at the fire there, it's a bit more stylized. It's not like a traditional fire. It's made to look, made to look a bit cartoony, but the challenge was making it actually still feel like it's physical and in the world. And then this is an Overwatch piece we did a while ago. You can see here, this is much more physical. This is kind of edging into kind of Pixar type style of effects where the effects are very physical and real looking, but the models and the animation's a bit more cartoony. So this is just an example of that where we have realistic lighting and realistic explosions and sparks and all that, but sitting in this Overwatch world. So we keep going. What's interesting, we've been supporting these properties for so long, sometimes the taste changes. So you can see here, this is another example from Overwatch. This is a cinematic we did almost 4 years ago. It's super gritty, super realistic. The muzzle flashes look real. The sparks are small and gritty, and you get the tiny quality and the bokeh in the depth of field. But then now, with Kuriko, the most recent cinematic we did, our muzzle flashes are a lot more stylized and cartoony. And this is the direction we get pulled along with the game team as they're kind of finding how they want to represent their game, and we have to evolve with them. So you see here, this muzzle flash is a lot more cartoony. It's a lot more stylized. The things that define the shape of the muzzle flash, the petals as we call them, are a lot crisper. And we've ended up entering up swinging into a more cartoony place now. You can see here, even with the lightning, it's a bit less dense. The particles are a bit bigger on the sparks, and the muzzle flash, as I mentioned before, is a lot more iconic, a lot more easy to read. So we did a lot of R&D to find that, and we had to work with the game teams, work with the creative stakeholders to find how it works. This is just the fun part of another thing we get to do is just R&D, which is a lot of fun. And here's one of the artists was just shooting a wall with this setup just to kind of proof out the concept. And I want to add this one in here because you can see kind of the raw uncomposited version and how you have the distinct bands of color that kind of get blended and to turn into this kind of more stylized version of a muzzle flash. So another thing we do, as I mentioned, is the more hyperreal type work. In doing this, we try to respect the lore and the concept behind the work that is done by the game teams and try to fabricate into something that works plausibly in the real world. That's the challenge. We want, to be successful at effects work, I think, part of that is deconstructing the effects and coming up with rules, breaking it down to motion versus texture, and coming up with small rules that kind of add up to complex behavior. So in doing that, we use a lot of simulations, and because we use simulations, we also get little happy accidents that are just kind of happen and look really nice because we have a foundational groundwork for all of our effects that kind of build up into very complex looking effects. So in doing that, we do a lot of research, so a lot of visual research. So here's a mural board that we did where we're collecting solar flares, reference, electricity reference, plasma, magnetic fields, all this stuff's to feed the artist into kind of how this thing is supposed to work. And, actually going back to the slide, the general takeaway of Inarius' wings that he's the sun. He's the bringer of light. That was the lore of the game. So his wings are supposed to look like they're solar flares. And that's the concept we started with, and that's, where we ran with it. And after we do all this collection, we get to do another fun thing, which is R&D. And this is just a breakdown of all the different types of R&D we do. We will get to smash things, we get to blow things up, get to break things. All this is none of this actually ends up, maybe the lower right one does, ends up in the piece. But this is all stuff we do just to kind of learn how this stuff can work and then apply it into our shots, into our cinematics. But another really important part of it is reference or concept art. So this is some concept art for a cinematic we did a long time ago for Diablo 4, the kind of first cinematic for Diablo 4. This is Lilith being born, and by 3 they come. And this is just some concept art we got to kind of flesh out, no pun intended, what this thing is made out of, the flesh cape, and how she's born in this portal. We shoot a lot of reference. This is before the pandemic hit. We bought some Mylar, and one of our artists decided to push his head into it. And we use that to kind of help determine the way that the light reacts to the character behind it, and also what kind of motion we want in our sims. More R&D. You can see here, this is just breaking it down to very foundational elements, and this is how all these effects start. What happens when you stretch this vellum solve, and how do we treat this thing? We came up with a technique where as the vellum strain is run, we fit that into certain parameter space, and that's used to drive how we mesh the mesh around the vellum. So just to get that sense that everything's really stretching and getting tight. And this little bit of information was used to drive pretty much the whole effect. And you can see here is a breakdown of all the elements, and then the final render. So we do a lot of simulation. Here, this is just another example for an earlier cinematic. The reference we get is very coarse, but we try to turn it into something. And so we end up doing a lot of volumetric sims, a lot of fluid sims, just a lot of ways to kind of make it feel like it's grounded in reality. So I want to put this in because this is from an in-game cinematic from WoW. So you can see here, this is Razagath, who's one of the dragons. And the idea is this dragon emits a lot of volume, and there's lightning going off it. The interesting thing that happened is, while we had to do this for the in-game cinematic, at the same time we were actually working on the pre-rendered cinematic, the hyper-real version. And I had 2 different artists, but they're working at the same time. So it created interesting, energy that they could actually work on this effect at the same time, but 2 different contexts. So this is the in-game version, and this is the pre-rendered version. In this version, we're simming the clouds, we're simming the volume coming off the dragon, getting the miss of light in the way that we're rendering. And that's kind of an interesting thing about what we do, is that we get to actually do these things in 2 different places at the same time. And we have to work with the game teams to make sure that we respect their VFX and it's in keeping with the lore. This is another example. from the WoW Dragonflight cinematic we did. In this example, the Drakthir, which is this dragon creature, when we got the boards, it was just shooting a fireball. And when we started the effect, we were just going for kind of a reddish fireball. But then in talking to the game teams, they let us know that, well, actually, all their powers come from within. They have different aspects, which represent all the different colors, represent different aspects of their magic. And then we try to take that and interpret it into something that looks physical and makes sense. So we came up with, in respecting that, we had the energy flowing through the arm, and then we did this, I guess, kind of like a chromatic shift in the fireball, so it actually looked like the fire is made of the actual magic coming from the Drakthir. And a similar thing happened here in the Eternity Surge. So this is what you see on the left is an image of the Eternity Surge. On the right is a YouTube clip I found online. The link is below. And this character basically does this kind of epic move where it jumps in the air and sucks in energy and shoots it out. And we had to turn that into what we did in the cinematic, in the pre-rendered cinematic. This is, to me, one of my favorite things, I did, that we did, not me, the team did that year, where we have the energy flowing from within, coursing through the wings, building up in the wings, and then manifesting into these bolts that come towards camera. And the same thing happens with on Kuriko. In the first slide, you saw the teleport, but we started with something like this. This is what the game team did for their effect, and we tried to take it and make it kind of work in our cinematic. Kind of put our spin on it. So here it is again in the game. But here it is in the cinematic. So the other thing that we did is we wanted to make it feel physical. So as we had to respect the timing, we really wanted this very snappy vibe. So as an effects artist, it kind of like broke our heart. We didn't get to actually like do as much volumetric sim as we wanted. We wanted this like big, very like, we're the star of the show. That's effects artists love to feel that way. We wanted like this giant fluid sim, but we had to really constrain it, but keep it snappy. But we also want to add some element of energy to it. So as you can see, it's a little detail that maybe only effects nerds like us will notice, but the volume is actually going in the direction that she's teleporting. So you can see that she's actually teleporting geographically down the hall, and the volume is supposed to pull your eye to where she's going. And you can see it here as well. So it's a small little detail, and it was a lot of fun to do this, actually. And here's more examples. So this one is a little weird shot. This is the first shot. What's interesting about the shot is that the camera is teleporting with her. So she's moving through space, and the camera is coming with her. You can see all the petals, which are very subtle in our effect, as opposed to you saw in the game, which is very big and really obvious. But in here, we kept it smaller. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with the results of the Kuriko teleport. It looks great. Also, there's a small detail. I'll show you. If you look on like 2 frames, it actually has her color in the volume, which we snuck in there because we really wanted to make it feel like it's connected to her. And then the same thing for the heal. So she has these cards she throws, if you played the game, where she throws the cards at her teammates and it heals them. They were working at this at the same time, so we were kind of going back and forth with the game team what this would look like. But what's cool about what we do, we also get a little bit of creative license because it's a different medium. So you can see here, this is how it manifested itself in the actual short. It's a little different. You'll see it's transparent. It's a little like not exactly the same. Has a lot more little details in it, fairy dust and all that, but I think it worked pretty well for the short. So then we get into this other kind of style that we have to do. So this is taking a concept and bending it into a more stylized aesthetic that's closer to the game VFX or desired style. So in this case, this is from that cinematic that I showed you earlier for the Arclight Rumble. They wanted something that looked very stylized in the fire, not like a traditional fire, but it had to also, work in this world. So it was a lot of back and forth, and pretty happy with the results. This is the ref that we got from our director and the creative stakeholders. This is some wonderful 2D VFX animation from somebody called Alex Redfish. Check out his stuff, it's amazing. But this was the target. Like, can you make this work in our cinematic? And we're all 3D visual effects artists. We all work in Houdini. So the challenge was trying to make visual effects that look like this. So traditionally, if you look at smoke or how smoke is done, it's done kind of something like this, which is like a toon shade. The problem with this doesn't really sit well with like a realistic render next to it. Like if you've seen this in application before, it kind of looks a little disjointed. You have like the toon shaded smoke next to your, realistically rendered character, and it like who has normal shadows, where this has like kind of clipped shadows. It doesn't quite work. So we wanted to go away from this approach, and we came up with this idea, if you can see in this breakdown, that we're going to create geometry of light that is moving really quickly and snappy, but it's always kind of embedded in a volumetric source to kind of get that glow and that softness, to make it feel integrated into the environment. So that's an example of that. And this is another example of the same concept. So you can see these kind of petal shapes. They're all integrated in the smoke, and there's like sparks and fairy dust. But the idea is that in the motion being snappy and in the shapes being very stylized, we can still have this vibe that it's stylized like that earlier ref, but it actually works in our rendering. We also wanted to figure out a new technique. So this is a tool that I made that stylizes pyrosims. You can see the pyrosim on the left, which is kind of more of a realistic type of render of a pyrosim, and then you see the stylized version on the right. The way this tool works is it tries to create distinct bands of temperature and creates actual geometry based on that, and then it illuminates. We still get that idea where you get that soft glow that illuminates the volume, but it's a little bit more stylized. The volume's simply smoothed and clipped to make it look a little bit more stylized. We didn't actually go with that volume, the smoke treatment at the end, but this is kind of an extremely stylized version of that. And we take the same concept and even try to make magical effects. So here I'm testing just bursting a sphere into place and using the same similar techniques with different colors and different sources to do the same thing. This was also used in testing explosions. So we're getting now the distinct bands. You have like the brighter orange and the lighter orange, and they're all evolving naturally, and they're all illuminating the density component or the smoke. So I want to put this in here. This is a breakdown of how this works. You can see all the distinct bands. The tool, you can say how many you want, and you can notice that each band has a unique brightness, a unique opacity, and a unique color. And that's how you get that very iconic, or not iconic, that very distinct banding in your fluid sim. And it turns it into something that looks cartoony, but it still works in this world because it can still illuminate the smoke. That's a really important part. Having the smoke helps embed it and make it feel like it's part of this world. And this is just an example, so you can see it kind of running in a shot. And another example. It's some R&D that we were doing. So this tool ended up actually having what was nice about it actually created geometry. And so as you may know, in game visual effects, volumetrics are kind of hard to pass back and forth. So we ended up using a technique similar to this for the actual WoW in-game prologue. So here we go. This fire is generated with a very similar technique, but it's embedded into our engine now, into the Diablo engine. And it gets us this kind of simmed fire that we sim in space. It's not like a typical visual effects asset where we kind of have a pipeline that makes, like, we create like shots in the engine, and it moves in space correctly, and we input our VAT, in this case, with all the right parameters on it so that into the shader so it looks like this. And you have it here as well. It's very windy, evidently. I didn't really notice that, but okay. So we take all that, and then, because of our in-game cinematic workflow, we are actually doing, this is what's interesting about our job now, we actually are using our more traditional VFX tools like Houdini, and we're now starting to try to take that data and put it into the engine. So you can see here, we've done just some simple ground interaction for the fingers, where this is from the Necromancer announce cinematic that was done in engine, just to show where she's drawing some sort of rune. So this is the beginning of that. You can see here, same thing. These are the runes. And then we do use flipbooks like I think a lot of visual effects studios do for textures for the kind of fluid sims that we see coming off the character. And here's another example using flipbooks generated in Houdini to create these magical effects. This is, again, for the Necromancer cinematic that we did. And that's it. That's everything. 20 minutes. Talked very fast. I don't know if you guys, we open up to questions. Is that the, cool. You guys have any questions? No?
So I'm currently studying tech art, and I'm learning Houdini, and so I had a quick question. Sure. Regarding with your studio or with your team, are people specializing in different Houdini like productions? Is like someone's really good at particle sims, the other's really good at procedural modeling, and so forth, or is everyone kind of like a jack of all trades?
It's actually quite organic. We end up on my team, we have certain artists that end up just doing a lot of a specific thing, so they kind of hone their blade at that specific thing, basically. But we try really hard to spread them out because our team is actually relatively small. We're a pretty small team. We have to do a lot of different work. So we have a handful of artists that are very, skilled at very specific things. But because of the size of our team, we can't afford. I mean, I worked in visual effects, which uses Houdini a lot, and that happens in that space when you have like a effects team of, some large facilities have like 100 Houdini users in there, and then you end up with, the 10 destruction guys who do rigid body sims and the, 10 fluid guys who only do explosions, and you end up kind of really subsetting. But with our team, since it's so small, we can't really afford to do that. So it's mostly just kind of soft, like I know, artist X is like awesome at explosions. So if he's available, I'm going to put artist X on explosions kind of thing, So that's the way it works. But we try to create opportunity for everybody because we want people to be interested. So we actually switch people around quite a bit. So, yeah. Anything else? Okay. Cool. All right. Thank you.